We are now in the Torah portion of Parashat Bo, which means that it's time again to read through the book of Exodus and hear once again the story of the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, and how Moses took the Jewish people out of Egypt. It's not Passover time yet. We haven't reached the spring. And when we get to the spring, we'll have the Seders again and hear the stories again. But even before we get there, because of the way the Torah portion unfolds and how we're in Exodus now, we hear the story a couple times over the course of the year. We don't have this with other holidays, although you're supposed to repent every single day for the things you do wrong. But we don't have any other holidays where every single day and many times over the course of the year, this is something we're focusing on. And it's probably because somewhere within the Passover story is the essence of what it means to be Jewish. And it's up to us each year to try and figure out how we understand that. You know, about 100 years ago, just over 100 years ago, in 1917, so 2 years ago we had the centennial of this event. In the year 1917, just over 100 years ago, two very interesting things happened. In 1917, on the Jewish historical timeline, was a very powerful year because this was the year of the Balfour Declaration, the year in which the powerhouse nation of Great Britain declared that they believed that it was a good idea and they were in favor of a Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. In that same year, 1917, the Soviet Union was founded and came into existence. And if you were a betting person in 1917, and someone said to you, you have this superpower of Russia, this vast piece of land, this major army coming off of a victory in World War I with tremendous resources and tremendous capacity. And then on the other hand, you have this tiny sliver of land with virtually no natural resources, hardly any people, surrounded by enemies that hated it, and you had to put some money down. In 100 years, who do you think is going to be better off, this nascent state of Israel or the Soviet Union? Who do you think is going to be around? It's very interesting that by 2017, the Soviet Union no longer existed, and the state of Israel is considered a mini superpower. In actuality, one of the strongest countries and considered the most innovative country perhaps on the planet. It was very interesting. And it mirrors in a lot of ways what's going on in this week's Torah portion and in the story of the Exodus. Egypt was a superpower of 30 to 40 million people, whereas the Jews were probably hovering around 1 million people with no nation and no army and no resources. And if you had to put some money down of who would win a war between a group of slaves and the world's superpower, you'd be hard-pressed to bet on the Jews. Although a lot of people didn't think that my Eagles could beat the Bears last week, and a similar miracle happened when the ball fell backwards off of the crossbar, which is called in Egypt in Chicago, the 11th plague. Hopefully we'll do the same to New Orleans this coming weekend. There is a contemporary Orthodox rabbi named Rabbi Yaakov Meidan, and he wanted to understand what was the real essence of what's going on in this story. And so he said, if we look at the word Passover, most Jews, if you ask them, where does the holiday of Passover get its name? We'll tell you very simply, during the 10th plague, when God sent the Mashchit, the angel of death, to come and kill the firstborn of all of Egypt, it passed over, it literally jumped over the houses of the Israelites or the Jews or whatever you want to call them. Now here's the problem with this idea that Rabbi Meidan was dealing with. All of the Jews lived in Goshen. And none of the Egyptians lived in this city called Goshen. How hard would it have been to tell the angel of death, the Jews live in this city, and the Egyptians live in that city, go to that city? Why was it necessary to jump over anybody's house? Just don't go there. And if he did pass over, what a weird job for the angel. Okay, well, I know I've got a job to do. I've got to pass over the Jewish homes. I know no Egyptians live around here, but on my way over to where the Egyptians do live, I'm going to run the 100-meter hurdles over their little huts until I get there, just to warm myself up. It's not the most logical argument. So Rav Meidan said, you know, the word Pesach doesn't even mean to jump over. The word Piseach in Hebrew actually means someone who limps. A Piseach is someone who limps, someone who has difficulty moving from one place to another, someone who would have a very tough time jumping over an entire home. By the way, my son has a wonderful joke. Can I jump higher than a building? People say, no, you can't jump higher. And he said, yes, I can. Buildings don't jump. So, that's neither here nor there, but when else do I have a chance to use this one? A piseach is someone who limps. It means someone who goes from one side very meekly over to the other. In fact, the word Pesach, it's not a word you find very much in the Bible, but one place you do find it is in the book of 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21, in a very famous story of Elijah the prophet. When Elijah the prophet asks the Jews, he sees them and he says, I see you're worshiping idols. You worship God, but you also worship idols. And Elijah says to the people, Ad matai poschim? How long are you going to be limping or meekly walking forth between one God and another? It doesn't have anything to do with jumping over houses. It means to move rather meekly from one place to another. So why is this holiday called Passover? Why is it when God didn't need to send an angel to jump over Jewish homes? They live by themselves. Perhaps it's not what it means. And Rabbi Meidan, in a very unique way of looking at this, said, I don't think God ever jumped over or passed over their homes. I don't think that's what happens at all. And if you look in this week's Torah portion, you find out it's not what happened. God didn't pass over their homes. Listen very closely to what happens. It says in chapter 13 of Exodus, when the angel shall come, I will poseach your homes so that the angel of death can't enter your homes. Huh? What did God do? God said, when I myself will poseach your homes so that the angel of death can't enter. Meaning, listen to what God's saying. When the angel of death comes to destroy the Egyptians, the firstborn of all of their families, I will enter your homes so that the angel of death cannot. Meaning, I'm sending the angel of death to enter every single home in Egypt. I'm not telling the angel of death to just go to the Egyptians. I'm telling him to go to every single home there is, including your homes. But when he comes to your homes, I will be there, and I won't let him in. God doesn't pass over the homes of the Israelites. God enters into the homes of the Israelites. Now think about what's going on here. According to scholars, the ancient Egyptians had over 500 gods. And they believed in those gods. They believed in those gods so long as they were the superpower and everything was going well. But when did they stop believing in the water god? The day it turned to blood. When did they stop believing in the sun god? The day it got dark. When did they stop believing that animals were divine? When the animals started to attack them. And one by one, after each plague, when the Egyptians were faced with any sort of adversity at all, they stopped believing in their gods. On the other hand, after the Jews had been through hundreds of years of slavery, after they'd been seemingly abandoned, after nothing was going their way and an angel was coming to kill them, when everything was dark, remember the last three plagues, the three plagues that happened in this week's Torah portion, all happened in the dark, as opposed to the 7 plagues in last week's portion that all happened in the light. When everything was dark, when there was no reason to believe in God, God came into the homes of the Israelites, and the Israelites welcomed God. It was the Israelites' welcoming of God that prevented the angel of death from entering into their homes. And what saved the Jews from being destroyed, as all of the firstborn children of Egypt were being destroyed, was that the Jews were open to welcoming their God even in times of adversity, even in times of difficulty. And in 1917, Russia had everything going its way in terms of power, and there was no reason to think that the Soviet Union would ever crumble. The Jews had nothing going for it, except for an ideology that the Jewish people were once given this land, and they had a spiritual connection. And even in the darkness following World War I, which was so very difficult for the Jews, and under the terrible clouds that were coming on the way from World War II, even as the Arab nations surrounded the land of Israel, and nobody was reaching out to help them, including England, during the time of the Balfour Declaration, there was a belief that something inside of Judaism was worth fighting for. Something in terms of the morality and the derech eretz kadma l'Torah, the kind manners that Jews showed each other even before they were given the Torah, taught them in Egypt that Judaism was worth fighting for. Only 100 years ago, one might have said, there's nothing left to fight for. There's no reason why we should continue to try to connect with the morality and the goodness of our tradition in such difficult days. But that's never been our way. It wasn't in the book of Exodus. It wasn't in the 20th century. And in 2017, just 100 years after the Balfour Declaration and the birth of the idea of the state of Israel, there is no Soviet Union. The Jews who were in the Soviet Union are mainly now in the state of Israel, and the state of Israel is celebrating just past its 70th birthday. The darkness that passed over the homes of the people of Israel gave the name Passover to this holiday that we celebrate and to the essence of what it means to be Jewish. But what it really taught us was that if our tradition is worth fighting for, if it really leads us to be good people and to treat each other with dignity and respect and to see the divinity in every single human being, then it's something that can never die and something that we will always fight for. This is the essence of what we learn as we read once again the book of Exodus, and as we will see when we sit down in a few months at our Seder tables. Ken Yiratzon. May this be God's will. Amen.